I'm so excited. Welcome to Sankofa Summer School. I'm excited because this is my school I'm actually teaching. So if you have been joining us for this 2024 season, you have attended several classes. You've seen me at the beginning introducing really amazingly brilliant people to give you drop knowledge about different topics. But tonight, I get to do it. And it's interesting because this was a last minute addition. There was a lot of conversations around this idea of Blackness. And I find many of the conversations to be pedestrian, but that is to be expected when they're had by racist people. So let's dig in and let's talk about what it means to be Black. So before I jump too much into this, I want to let you know that I am the founder of Sankofa Summer School, and I started this a few years ago while I was a graduate student at Temple University studying under various brilliant minds like Dr. Molefi Asante, Dr. Nadav, Dr. Jabali Ade, Dr. Kamani Nuhusi, and many more. And I was in class one day and my professor said, why don't we have more Afrocentric schools? And I said, oh, I'll start one. And I did. Right in the middle of the pandemic. So here we are. I love when I have other folks come in and teach, but sometimes I like to teach. I am a professor, I am a scholar, and I like to share what I know. So let's get into this. What does it mean to be Black? And I know folks are going to be like, what is she going to be talking about? Like, there's no one way to be Black. What is she talking about? No, actually, we're going to dig into that. But I am going to also give you some history because I do believe that in order to understand Blackness or what it means to be Black, you have to understand how Blackness came to be. And this idea of Black does not exist without the idea of white. And so we're going to do a little bit of historical stuff, and then we're going to get into some race versus culture and all that great stuff. So let's see, where are we going? I make sure that let me tell you, I got so many screens open. Let's see. All right, here we go. So Dr. Molefi Asante developed Afrocentricity as a theoretical framework in the 1980s. Since then, brilliant scholars have expanded the Afrocentric paradigm, giving us a template to guide our educational praxis. Simply, being Afrocentric means centering Africana people in their own narratives and making them the subjects, not the objects, of other people's stories. For most of us, our learning experiences have been primarily Eurocentric. We learned that European ways of knowing and being are the best and universally applicable. Afrocentricity challenges this notion of European white supremacy and encourages us to center ourselves as Africana people first and foremost. We take this approach with Sankofa Summer School because it is empowering and it is the truth. And I ask all of the instructors to start with that statement because that sets the grounding and the tone for what we will be discussing. Understand this is blackity, blackity, black, 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 blackity, black. However, ironically, this presentation, and I tell all my instructors, you can't cite people who are not of the African diaspora. I have to for this conversation because we didn't come up with this idea of race. So in order to discuss it, I have to talk about old wealthy white men. And so I will have to do that. I'm sorry. You're going to get a lot of white men today. But we are going to be talking about the myth of race, right? And it's really important that you understand that race is a myth, right? It's a figment of our collective imagination, seriously. And we'll discuss how it became a thing that was used and is used to oppress people. I'm going to touch on racial formation theory just a little bit. What do we understand about how racism became a thing that affects billions of people today? A little bit on race versus culture. Who you are depends on how you show up in the world and what your community says about you. What matters more, race or culture? I mean, we'll decide. You'll decide. I don't know. Maybe we don't have the answer right now. And, people always say Black people are not a monolith and all this other stuff. And yes, we are. Yes, we are. We absolutely are. And I'll explain how and why. All right. So that's kind of what we're going for today. It may seem like a lot, but I trust that you trust me to be engaging and to give you some information that you're going to benefit from. All right. So, in the beginning, we always have to talk about the beginning, right? So in the beginning, there was Alkebulan. And if you don't know what that is the original name of the continent of Africa, right? Already, some of y'all are watching like, holy shit, I didn't even know that. She's dropping bombs already. Oh, I didn't mean to cuss. I'm sorry, y'all. It's Friday. I'm from New York. It is what it is. Yes, it all started there, right? And it's always important to start at the beginning as an Afrocentric scholar, okay? Alkebulan is the origin of all humanity and cultures, right? Maaticity, African matriarchy, so many things that people do today, whether you are Asian, indigenous, Latino, black, white, it comes from Africa. Now, white people, y'all got shit a little distorted, but it comes from Africa. Some of us know how to carry on culture and traditions, and other people play polka, but it all starts in Africa, right? What we call Africa today, right? And that's important, right? So, usually when I teach my students, I always bring up this map. This map is the indigenous civilizations before the Asiatic or European or Arab invasion that we talk about, right? So we're going back hundreds of thousands of years, right? This is how the continent was divided, and it was divided by its people, right? And its groups. We don't call them tribes. Tribes is a colonizer language. These were groups of people. These were cultures of people, right? So you had the Wagadu Mande, you had the Songhai, the Hausa, the San, the people of Kemet, the Kush people. All these people existed, right? But we know for a fact, this is what we know, right? And I'm going to rely on, white people's disciplines, anthropology and such, that Lucy, right, 3.2 million years old, was found in the region that was once known as Kemet, that we now refer to as like Egypt or Somalia or Eritrea, in that area. And we know that Littlefoot was found in South Africa, and Littlefoot is actually older than Lucy. And see, some of y'all never heard of Littlefoot. See, that's what I'm saying. So Littlefoot was older and was found in South Africa in the 1990s. Either way, we know that these are the oldest samples and examples of human beings and life on this planet, and they are in the continent of Africa. Okay, that's it. Point blank, period. All right. So now we know that something happened, and we call it the Ma'afa. And the Ma'afa, M-A-A-F-A, means the great disaster. Okay, it's a Kiswahili word for the great disaster, right? And that's how people on the continent saw this invasion of Arabs and Europeans, right? And I call it human trafficking. And the reason why I started calling enslavement and slavery and things like that human trafficking is because I think, and it's going to sound weird, but I think that the word slavery doesn't mean much to people anymore, right? Because what ends up happening is people say, oh, well, slavery has always existed. It's been in every culture. It's been in every group. It doesn't really matter that it happened to you. That part is silent, right? But when we talk about human trafficking, that evokes an emotion that people are not necessarily prepared to deal with. And I like to say that because that's exactly what happened, okay? So Arabs came in, right? And they began this trade before the Europeans did. That's really important part of history that doesn't always get taught, right? And the influence there then means, right? So if you imagine, if we were to go back to, let me go back to this map, right? So we're thinking of Arabs coming possibly from this area and then coming back to the land. And when I say back to the land, it's because we all started here and then we migrated. But when you think about them coming back here, they end up starting in this area. Let me actually make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. They start in this area, but then we know that the people that were trafficked to the Americas were basically coming from mostly from these areas. Well, then how did they get from here to here? Well, the Arabs trafficked them across the continent, right? That's important to know. First of all, the United States fits like over here. Okay, so I need you to get a perspective of how huge this is, right? So for hundreds of years, Arabs were picking people up over in this region, bringing them over here. stopping along the way, trading, trafficking, selling, buying, all these kinds of things were happening, right? So they get over in this region. And then when the Europeans start to come, then they start trading with them and working with them, right? But they're also connecting with local groups, local groups of people. They're trading with them. And yes, these people are Black Africans and they're doing this. That is a part of the history. Oh, you can't see where I'm pointing? Oh, I'm so sorry. I will work on that. I'm not going to point as much. Okay. But the idea is that they were coming from East Africa to West Africa, right? So this began in 652. I don't know how many of you learned that, but yes, in 652. And that's when the Arab trafficking began. It eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean into Africa before expanding to Europe and Asia. They moved East Africans from one side of the continent to the other. They traded with Europeans. And then in 1452, okay, almost 1,000 years later, folks, like this, let that sit. Almost 1,000 years later, the Pope comes and says, Pope Nicholas V, he endorsed Spain and Portugal's mass kidnapping and enslavement of Africans because he said it would help to Christianize them, right? So when we get into talking about this idea of talking about, oh, Christianity began in Africa and it's from Africa. Shut up. Like, stop it. Let's be honest here. If anything, without the intervention of Europeans, the continent would likely be mostly Muslim because of who was originally invading. And in fact, many of the people that were trafficked were Muslim. They were African, they were West African, from West African groups, and they were Muslim, right? Many still held on to traditional African religions that we now, talk about more today. But Islam was what was spreading over the continent, okay? Oh, let's go back. Clicked a little too far. All right. So that all happened. We know that happened. Many of us learned about slavery in the United States in the Central America areas. I hate using America when I'm talking about this page, but you know what I'm talking about. So in the islands, South America, things like that, we learned, a bit about that. What a lot of us don't learn is about how race was being made in classrooms in Europe and the United States. And so when I say that, it's really important that you understand that sometimes I can be flippant about this because of how ridiculous this idea is, that a group of white men, literally like 10 or 15 of them, changed the course of human history by coming up with this idea of race. Okay? And when you think about it, you're just like, holy hell, how are they able to do it? Well, these were not unintelligent men. These were actually some of the foremost thinkers of the time. Philosophy is really emerging as something that is not just kind of off the cuff or in the shadows. It's really becoming a part of everyday academic life. Everybody's coming up with all these ideas, expansion, it's intelligent age, all of that stuff. They're not smart people. They're patriarchal and arrogant and ignorant as hell, but not unintelligent. There's another group that's working on plans that I keep telling y'all, they are not unintelligent, they're just racist, okay? You know what I mean. Anyway, so we have August Weismann, right? German, and Germany plays a big role in modern racism, okay? German evolutionary biologist. Basically, if something is not biological in origins, it must be social, right? He has this hard heredity idea, which means that the environment can't change heredity, right? Now, come on, y'all. If everything began in Africa and the people had Black skin, per European philosophers who traveled to the continent and wrote about seeing people with Black skin, right? How the hell they get light skin if not for environmental factors? How did Asian people develop thicker eyelids to deal with the winds in Asia? Okay. Why is it that everybody that's by the equators have dark skin? Come on. Like, we know that this happens. But the Nazis end up embracing this, and they use this to claim racial supremacy because they're saying we've been Aryan and all of this shit for hundreds of years. We're the master race. We haven't changed in all these years. Therefore, that must mean that we are this master race. Now, at this time, race is being used, and is being talked about as it relates to people like, say, Berbers or, Ethiopian or what have you, right? We would probably say nationality these days, right? But also including Persian and things like that. So race was used in that way, but it was not a phenotypical thing. These racist bastards started trying to prove that this was, that race was a phenotypical thing. And I'm just going to introduce you to some of the racists who came up with race and changed the course of human history. Okay. Nathaniel Southgate Shaler was born to enslavers. He studied at Harvard. Please make note that Harvard is responsible for so much of racism in the United States. It's not even funny. That's why I'm not surprised they got rid of Sister Claudine Gay, because they are one of the most racist institutions on the planet. Shout out to all you Black folks that graduated from there and didn't completely lose your entire sense of self. But anyway, he was a creationist who supported polygenism. Now, if you think about polygenism as opposed to monogenism, monogenism is this Adam and Eve theory, right? This idea that most European philosophers and Christian people believed that we're all descended from Adam and Eve. Even the most hardcore Christian today knows that that's impossible, but this was the prevailing thought. So was the idea that the earth was flat, right? They're not as smart as we thought, but that's just because they didn't know, right? Polygenism says that we actually all come from different people, right? Now, how does that work with Lucy and Littlefoot? I'm not that person, but here we go. He wrote a book called The Negro Problem in 1884, right? He was a proponent of slavery, right? Obviously, that's how his family made its money and was able to send them to Harvard, right? Through human trafficking. But he said Black people, and I'm using Black here, right? Just to be general. He says they're like children lost in the wood, needing the old protection of the strong mastering hand, right? This is around the time we start seeing more of these scholars using language of mastery and master race and inferiority connected to ideas of race, or connected to the fact that people are different. One is better than the other, right? That's where this is really, we're starting to see this. We're starting to see it in the United States. We're also starting to see it in Europe, okay? Don't matter. They're all the same white people. I mean, I'm sorry. They just kind of all. Shaler had students, okay? His students, Charles Warren, Robert DeCourcy Ward, and Prescott F. Hall, they're all Harvard grads. They formed the Immigration Restriction League in 1894, right? Another student of his was Henry Cabot Lodge, who was an anti-immigration politician. They were able to get him to sponsor a bill that would restrict immigration and come up with a literacy test. Basically, if you want to come here, you got to be able to read all this other stuff, right? These kinds of things are starting to happen, and it's all happening because of eugenics, right? This guy, Charles Davenport, is another one. He is a zoologist. He's founder of what was called the American Breeders Association. Yes, you heard that right. He said, what is to be the consequence of racial intermingling? And as he's talking about racial intermingling, it's also an immigrant issue, right? I don't want to divorce the immigrant issue from their racism, because it's all the same, right? Especially we of the white race, okay? White race isn't being used as much, and now it is. Now it's entered the lexicon, right? Proud of its achievement in the past, are eagerly questioning the consequences of mixing our blood with that of other races who have made less advancement in science and the arts. And you know why I always talk about this particular thing? Because who the hell you think created art and science? Please rock with me for a second. Africans. So it was the audacity of white mediocrity. And I don't care if they had a PhD, because they were mediocre. And this is how they began to ascend socially, by pretending and creating themselves to be more than what they are. They try to say that they are the leaders in science, art, technology, all these things, when we know they didn't come up with none of that shit, right? But this is how racism begins. It begins by establishing a racial hierarchy in the classrooms. These people are teaching the future minds. They are at Harvard. They are at Cambridge. They are at the top universities in the world. And they're starting to develop scientific racism, at least what we call scientific racism right now. What is scientific racism? It's the way of justifying racism through science, right? So determining that there's a biological basis for race, there is not. We all know who this guy is, right? If you don't know who this guy is, very ugly guy, very, very silly. This is Charles Darwin, by the way. I know they all kind of look alike, right? He comes along and he gets thrown in this mix. And I'm going to say this, I don't think, I do think that Charles Darwin was racist by virtue of him being a white man at this time, right? It was almost impossible not to be. But I do not think that when he was coming up with some of these ideas that he intended for the Nazis to use them the way that they did. I don't think he did. Maybe, you know what? I'm not going to speak for the white man. I'm not here to defend. But here's what he said. He defined evolution as a descent with modification, right? So he's also in this kind of like, thinking about this biological basis of things, right? This idea that species change over time. He's allowing the fact that, yeah, everybody could have started in Africa, but they change over time, right? There's a lot of these thoughts coming in, but he says that new species can share a common ancestor. That falls into the monogenism thing a little bit, still upholding this Adam and Eve idea, but allowing for the fact that, yes, Adam and Eve are here, but they were white. And so if these Black people exist, they must be different. And so that's racist, right? We like that. I hope you all understand that is racist. But you've got people like Darwin and others, and then Darwin's kinfolk, who comes up with the eugenics movement, right? It's a direct extension of social Darwinism, right? Eugenics, both the term and the movement behind it, were the brainchild of Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin. I'm telling y'all, it's the same people. It's the same group of people. Galton coined the term eugenics in 1883 from the Greek words for well-born and based on the concept of some of Darwin's writings, right? So a lot of what we see happening among these men is they're reading what one is saying, they want to expand on it. That's what we do as philosophers, as doctors. We look at people's theories and we expand them, right? Then we have Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. Now, you should recognize the name Oliver Wendell Holmes if you paid attention in history class or if you care about the government. But anyway, his daddy was the dean of Harvard, right? And he believed in eugenic principles, that he believed that they could be used to address the nation's social problems. And he and Galton were buddies. Yes, they were. So he brings Galton over and he's like, let's see how eugenics can work in the United States. So we've got a two-pronged thing happening. We've got the Europeans trying to establish race and hierarchy of races over in Europe. And we're talking in England, Germany, France, places like that. And then in the United States, they're trying to do that. So much for divesting of English rule, right? But they're trying to do the same thing here, right? The eugenics movement brought biological determinism, racial prejudice, and the active agenda of eugenics right up to the Nazi regime of Hitler, right? I have to continue to bring in the Nazis because the Nazis that we talk about as they were under Hitler, which is one iteration of colonial terrorism, right? Of white supremacist terrorism, right? The Holocaust against Jewish people and 6 million Jewish people, 11 million people total, people that were considered undesirable, all caught up in the eugenics movement, Africans, queer, disabled, all of that. That was one iteration of it. But it is a very good example of how these philosophers sitting in their Harvard classrooms and publishing scientific racism in their books empowered the Nazis, okay? Because the Nazis are looking at what they're saying and they're like, well, wait a minute. This makes sense for our agenda. Let's justify what we are doing by citing these scientists, right? Because they're philosophers, they're PhDs, they're intelligent, they must be right. And we can use this to justify what we're saying, right? That speaks to how science and research can be manipulated for nefarious causes. But we have to make that connection. And I will just say that the Nazis represent one iteration, because not only was Hitler studying these people and his folks were studying these people, they were also studying the people in the United States, the United States government, and how it was treating Black folks here. Okay, please understand that. It's all connected. But I've got some pictures here that I want to show you. So let me blow it up a little bit. All right. So these are images that were used in these times to try to determine what the races were, right? A lot of it based on skull things. Here they are comparing, people. Oh, so this white skull is all beautiful and perfect and right, but the Negro one looks like an ape. Okay. All right. Well, if you believe in evolution and believe that human beings are evolved from apes or what have you, well, okay, the original human beings are going to look more like the apes. And y'all are the deviations. But that's okay. We end up getting a lot of these different types of charts. They're starting to try to figure out how they can separate and categorize everybody. This is not something that is done formally until this time. Yes, there is discussion of, people being different, looking at phenotypes, calling people different races, but it's this time that we're actually starting to see this stuff published and be spread around as though it is the truth. Okay, so we're getting different types of images. This is all like historical. All these things were used. And you know how they did it? These racist ass anthropologists, shout out to all you anthropology majors who have degrees in a racist discipline. They would go to these different places and take pictures. They would go and measure people's skulls. They would literally go to them and force them and subject them to being measured and poked and prodded and studied just so they could develop these kinds of charts so they could establish a racial hierarchy based on phenotype. Okay. That should piss you off, but whatever. Here's another one. But if you notice, it's all men. There's no women. There's never any women in these. Well, sometimes there is. I think there's one in the middle there, but rarely do you see women, right? They're always talking about men. But this was in science books. They were teaching this. And so this is where we start to see the separation of races based on phenotype. And if you don't know what phenotype means, I'm talking about physical characteristics and traits: skin color, hair texture, size of the nose, breadth of the eyebrows, size of the lips, all those kinds of things, right? This is when we start getting this idea that race is connected to these things. Now you understand why it's like, this is some made up nonsense. These men sat around rooms and were just like, we're just going to decide this and we're going to make it so that we can place ourselves at the top. This was a creation in like a freaking war room, okay? Like, we should be upset about this, right? So you have this one here. It says the Iberians, hold on, let me see if I can read this. Let me move myself out the way. The Iberians were believed to have originally an African race, thousands of years ago, spread themselves through Spain over Western Europe. Their remains are found in the harrows of burying places and This was used, right, this is just an example of how anti-Blackness was used to penalize people. So by likening the Iberian folks, right, if you go to Spain and Portugal and stuff, you're going to have some better food because it is African, right? But they are trying to connect them to Africa to make them seem less than, while maintaining this hard heredity and suggesting that the white Anglos, though, they've always been white. It's bullshit, but that's what they would do. Oh, let me go back. Racial formation theory. I'm going to hint on this. I am not posting any more white men on this. Okay. Enough white men for, I feel, no offense to the white men watching, but you understand what I'm saying, right? When you hear about what these men have done, you understand why they disgust me, right? Omi and Winant, right? So you got Michael Omi and you got Howard Winant. I don't have a picture of Howard Winant here, but anyway, they came together and they came up with what we now call racial formation theory. And it's a framework that seeks to deconstruct race as it exists today in the United States. And I mean, we could apply it globally, but the focus on the United States is important because the United States remains a failing social experiment, right? And we can see its failures, we can feel its failures every day. But this idea that, keeping it in the United States is important because of how the United States has gone about twisting and creating race and racism. I mean, like, the United States really is one of the worst countries in the world when it comes to racism. So that's why it's important to study. They're the ones who are suggesting that race is a social construct, right? Everybody says this, they don't know where it comes from, right? Oh, race is a social construct. Well, who said that? Well, now you know. The racial order is organized and enforced by the continuity and reciprocity between micro level and macro level of social relations, right? So, that this idea that there's no biological basis for race, right? And they maintain this. They're like, listen, we understand there's no biological basis for race. It's been debunked. Anthropologists, even the racist ones have debunked this. They're like, nah, you can't say that a phenotype indicates race, right? But they also say that doesn't mean that racism isn't real. So even though we recognize now that all those white men were sitting in those Harvard classes and being German philosophers, and they were coming up with this stuff, and they made it up, it doesn't mean that racism isn't real if we say that race isn't real. You understand what I'm saying? This idea, racism is not simply based on the idea of race, but rather the idea of racial hierarchy. And that hierarchy exists because of specific race making done to place white men at the top of the hierarchy. Okay. So in that sense, it becomes a social thing. It becomes something that is almost socially contingent, right? We can try to be idealistic and try to erase race, but we can't erase the impact of racism. So it's best to understand it intellectually, right? They said that race can be challenged based on the politics of the time, which makes it unstable. And that's some serious stuff there to think about how race can change based on politics, right? And I'm thinking about, and part of why I'm doing this is because I'm thinking about the conversations about Vice President Kamala Harris and people trying to decide, what is she? If we did not live in a racist world, that would not be a concern, right? What is she? Well, does it matter what she is? Well, it matters in terms of how the races she's been assigned have affected her life, have shaped her worldview, and have dictated how she navigates society, right? I do have a cool picture. I put Michael Omi as the elder Asian, but also Michael Omi as the younger hippie Asian because he was kind of cute. I'm saying, if he came up to me, I'd be like, hey, here's my number. I'll let a girl. All right. So now we get into this idea of race versus culture. I've been talking about race, and I hope that you understand that it was written out on a piece of paper, right? So what do we do with that, right? We start to think about the idea of culture. Well, what is culture, right? So race, we have already talked about, it's been used to describe ethnic groups for centuries, but didn't come into be regularly used to describe phenotype until European and American philosophers in the 19th century began using it that way. It's a cultural construction created by European patriarchs going back to the 1700s, right? So they began this work back in the 1700s, But in terms of the language and how it's used, that gets popularized later on. But we also have to recognize that for them, it was necessary to assert dominance over Africans, Asians, and indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere because of the exploration, right? So again, if we go back to what the Pope was talking about in 52 or 62, we have to go back to that because there's already this recognition that those people are different. And now they're starting to reach these other lands and encountering people, and they're like, those people are different. And that's really the impetus for this study, for this creation of scientific racism. They don't understand how those people are over there, right? To them, Europe is the center of the world. So as they're going into Africa, the place that they come from, they're like, well, why do these people look like this? Why are they different? But even more when they're traveling over looking for spices that they still don't use to this day, they encountered people. They were like, well, who are these people and how did they get here and what do they do? But we need to control this land. So therefore we need to figure out how we can make them seem inferior to us. And that's what we're going to do. And that's how it happened. It was all necessary to assert European hegemony over other people, right? Dominance, control, hierarchy. That's what that's about. But when we start talking about culture, right? So Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove, two of my mentors, they wrote a book called Being Human Being. And I'm going to pull some stuff from that for the next couple of slides. They said the cultural construction of race challenges the theorizing of race as a social construct. They understand that race is definitely socially constructed, right? But they understand that culture has more of an influence in how we should be constructing this idea of race. If we're not going to throw race aside completely, at least let us start to think about the impact of culture. So what do we know about it? Culture connects us to the way we socialize and how we navigate society, right? That is key. And that is why there are some people who struggle not having culture or feeling like they don't have culture. Everyone has culture, but some people feel like they don't have like some kind of ethnic culture because they're like, how do I navigate this world? Who am I, right? Culture influences humans to build societies in different ways. Truth of the matter is, I'm going to set up this land and this space based on what I understand to be culturally true for me and my people. You and your people may do things differently. And so there may be some conflicts there, right? But we're going to set up this society based on our cultural values and our needs. Culture unifies communities with a sense of belonging. This idea of belonging is really what makes us the groups that we are, the so-called demographics that we are. And there are a lot of people who do not feel like they belong anywhere, right? That's a byproduct often of European individualism. So while the Europeans were out and doing all that self-made millionaire shit, the rest of the world was still living as cultural communities who relied on each other and understood the importance of interconnectivity, which is fundamentally an African principle rooted in Ma'at, okay? Cultural identity is shaped by a shared history, language, psychology, and spirituality, okay? This is a fundamental truth. If you are in South Philadelphia and you are Italian, you are Italian, okay? And the way you know you are Italian is because you have a shared history with the people down the block. You guys maybe speak a little bit of Italian, maybe with a mix of American English. You know some history. You have these ways of thinking and these ways of understanding things. Your Italian grandmother probably does things different from your friend's Mexican grandmother, right? And then you got a certain spirituality. Italians often tend to be Catholic, right? That's going to be very different from the folks in North Philly who are largely Muslim, right? These things exist. And so the first culture out of Africa was African matriarchy. And I put a smiley face there because I cannot do a full class on this. I cannot. But I want you to understand the importance of motherhood and maternal figures and women in African culture. So and I would say African culture as one culture, not talking about different cultures, because it doesn't matter where you would go, whether it was East Africa, West Africa, South or North, women were the center of their communities. Mothers were revered like gods, okay? That is a fundamental truth. And if you go to any African nation or any African space right now where the men are dominating, it is because of the Arab and European invasions, okay? That is a disruption from the African ways of being, all right? Understand that. And I just smile because Black women, Black women, Black women. That's it. Here in the United States, around the world, look at the Olympics right now, Black women, Black women, Black women. Okay? But what is Blackness? Well, now you're going to get controversial, huh? Dr. Taylor, what is Blackness, right? So the word Black, right, as it is used to describe people of the African diaspora, became common during the colonizers' exploration age. Nigeria is called Nigeria because the word means land of the black people. Okay. What is the words for black in Portuguese, Spanish, things like that? You got to think about that, right? That's how that idea of assigning color starts becoming popular, right? However, in the United States, and I'm kind of bringing that a little bit back to the United States, is they were using colored, right? Colored was what was used in the antebellum South, and they also used the N-word slur. Sometimes they also use Negro. Now, this is important because there was a conversation recently on social media about this artist Tyla and her being called colored, and she's coming out of South Africa. And I'm telling you that colored had a very similar meaning. In those two, they diverge, but the idea was similar, which is why Negro became important for emancipated people, because they felt that colored was too broad. It could mean, we started having Asian people come in. They were often being categorized as colored, things like that. So for distinction purposes, people began to embrace Negro more because that was distinct. Pero es como negro, right? It's the same word, right? Negro, it's the same thing, right? So don't be offended unless you don't want to be called a colonizer word, which I understand, and we'll get into that. Colored was preferred by the free people, and this is really what's interesting. Those emancipated prior to the 13th Amendment tend to prefer colored, whereas those who were freed because of the 13th Amendment tended to prefer Negro. Okay, I can't get to that too much, but it's just really interesting. But some of the other words that have been used have been Black, Afro-American, African-American, right? The use of Black, and that's why I have Sheikh Anta Diop here, is he was writing about Negroes, right, in the 1950s, but he was talking about Black Africans. And he might be the first, he's one of the first people to talk about the ancient Africans being Black, okay? Black by phenotype according to the racists. What Sheikh Anta Diop was really good at was using racists and their philosophies against them to prove that the original people were Black, right? That's part of that. We could go. He's got so many books you could read. Great guy, one of the forefathers of Afrocentricity, all these wonderful things. He comes up with the two cradle theory, which is this idea that there are two cradles, a northern cradle, a southern cradle. People of the southern cradle were African people. They were stationary, agricultural people. People of the northern cradle, the Europeans, were nomadic. They moved around a lot, all those kinds of things. Two cradle theory, go look it up. All right. But what do the scholars say about Blackness, right? You've got Frantz Fanon. A lot of people love to talk about Frantz Fanon, right? I don't like the nigga, but I didn't mean to say that. He says some cool things. However, his flaw was not recognizing what we call dislocation. And dislocation relates to Asante's theory of location, that you have to understand the situations in which people are in and what they are taught. When I keep talking about anthropology and sociology and all those things being racist, and those of you that have been educated in those, that you have these racist degrees, it's not your fault. It's just you were educated according to these ways. That's dislocation. He was really preoccupied with colonization. Like, he was so focused on that. And he had this idea that Blackness is an ethic of resistance, right? And that's what was really powerful that you can kind of extract from Fanon. But Fanon really loved white women. I mean, he did. And he even talked about the women of Martinique like being liabilities, right, to progress. If you're talking about African progress and things like that, and he's not the only one. There are other African scholars, and please understand that when I use African, I'm talking about everybody of the diaspora. There's other African scholars who also kind of had this idea that somehow women were liabilities, but understand that as an influence of European patriarchy, because no African man is going to think that a woman is inferior, okay? Go listen to Lady by Fela Kuti, okay? But he had books, Wretched of the Earth, Black Skin, White Mask. Some of you have claimed to read them. I know you haven't. But try to read them if you can. Then you've got Lewis Gordon, African-American philosopher raised in Jamaica and the Bronx. BX all day, son. We out here being smart. He is the author of Fear of Black Consciousness, I think it's the most recent book, and Bad Faith and Anti-Black Racism. He questions how Blackness operates within a racist society. He says the race issue is only prominent for Black people. And that's a really interesting idea, right? And when you start to think about it, this race thing is not that big for other groups of people. It's really not. Like, if you sit and think about it for 5 minutes, the most detrimental impact of this idea of race has been felt by people of the African diaspora, right? He says Blackness is less about biology and more about values placed on Black people, right? So here we have extracted, this race as a phenotype thing, but rather how Black people exist determines their value. And in racism, anti-Black racism says who you are culturally is inferior, right? So again, we are moving away from biological bases of race, and we are talking just culturally, how we show up, who we are. They're basically like, we still don't like you, Then you have Dr. Molefi Asante, who says that to be Black is to share the evolving political and social interests of oppressed people. Sorry, not oppressive. Forget the typo. It's interesting, right? Because that opens the door for people who may not be Black the way we think about it to identify as Black in that cultural sense, right? That's sociopolitically, right? There's a blackening that happens. And reason why we have to think about that is because when you think about, how people are treated, right? Think of Indian, go to Latin America, all these things. Anti-Blackness is a real thing, and it translates into colorism, right? It translates into caste system. It translates into a lot of things that are oppressive for different people based on phenotype and such, right? So he's saying that blackening has happened to people who are not of the African diaspora. That's wild, right? Something to think about. He also says Blackness isn't based on complexion because that's essentialist, it's not a phenotype. Okay? It's not a phenotype. Yes, you will look at me and you'll be like, oh, that's a Black woman right there. But are you going to look at me and be like, oh, she got white in her? Well, if you think I have white in me, what has you thinking that? Right? Are you looking at my hair texture? Are you looking at my skin color? You understand that when you look at Black people, we are every color of brown, every shade of possible brown that we could be. Black people come in it, right? So what does that mean? Because everybody else is a shade of brown too, even though they call Asians yellow. It's just a very light shade of brown. Same for indigenous people. Same for white people, right? Ooh, I know you didn't want to hear that. Right. That's why y'all all sound really stupid when you talk about how we are melanated people. Everybody's melanated except for people with albinism. Anyway, it is led to unnecessary marginalization. And that again goes to like Gordon's idea of like how value is assessed. Blackness as a practice. So let's think about this. How you show up, okay? How you show up in your community. Blackness is a practice that asserts our humanity, right? If you're a bootlicker, we're not claiming you. If you're somebody who is groveling for that crumb to be tossed off the table, you are not asserting your humanity. Now, you ain't one of us, okay? Blackness inherently struggles against domination, and in our struggle, we fight, and when we fight, we win. See, I'm all in it. Okay, no, that didn't work. Okay. The question of race is not an African question. Africans are not focused on hierarchies and racial superiority. And if you encounter Africans who are, it is because their brains have been warped by white supremacy. Okay. Who we are is known by whom we come from. This is a direct quote from Molefi Asante, from our ancestors. And the more fully we know them, the more powerful our sense of identity. And this shows up within these so-called diaspora wars, and we do have a class coming up on that soon, this idea of denying people a connection to their African cultural heritage by saying that they don't have any identity, it renders us powerless in many ways. And that is why you do see people that are African American and other groups clinging to their sense of cultural identity, because it feels powerless when you don't know who you are or where you come from. And so that the white supremacy has our family on the continent, well, some of our family, because there's still vestiges of colonization, trying to deny us access to that culture while they are able to borrow from how we have taken that culture and evolved it and interpreted it. They're like, well, no, we want to take those parts though, but you can't have ours. That doesn't make sense. It renders us all powerless, right? All right. People have to choose Blackness. It is not simply by phenotypical association, but by conscious participation. And that's why I get on folks all the time. I'm like, y'all keep saying everybody Black and Black is different. No. You have to consciously participate and decide that you are going to be Black. Now, when we talk about this term Black, right, the way that I use it, first of all, I prefer to use African. And the reason why I prefer to use African is because it is a direct rejection of the imposition of this word Black on us. Please understand, the Black label comes from them, not us. We knew who we are. We know what our names are. Our names were San. Our names were Hausa. It's not Black. But we have used it because it has become the common language. It has become the common language because of white supremacy. So we have embraced this idea of Black, even and if we look into the 1960s and 70s, where Black becomes a political term and people are using Black as an assertion of strength and dominance, right? And a unifying term to connect those in the United States, those in Jamaica, those in Brazil, those in Nigeria, those in UK, those in Australia, that started to create some political strength. So when I use Black, it is for common language conversation, just like using the stupid ass DSM. I say it to cover everyone of the African diaspora who participates in Blackness. That's my caveat. Dr. Asante might argue with me a little bit, but I'm adding that caveat. You have to participate in Blackness for me to consider you Black. And that's it. And it doesn't matter what your skin looks like, because again, we've already proven that race is not real, has nothing to do with biological determinations. It's how you show up. And some of you do not show up as Black, therefore you are not Black to me. Who we are is known by whom we come from. This is why Black people around the world, when they meet new people, will say, who are your people? Well, where are your people from? Do we not? You want to know, are you from Falmouth? You from Lagos? You from Queens? Where are your people from? That's what we want to know. Because that's who we are. That's how we show up. That's how we identify each other. Black is a singular consciousness. Blackness cannot be at war with Americanness or any other nationness, since it is not a nation, race, or ethnic group, right? And this is a direct response to the fallacy of Du Bois's double consciousness theory. He said that, we are Black and we are American, or we are African and we are American. And there's no double consciousness, because American is not a race. It's nothing more than citizenship. And that helps to break us out of these diaspora wars too. Jamaican is not a race. It's a nationality. There are people in Jamaica of all races, right? But you will say that there's a culture there by virtue of these people having a shared history and living in the same spaces and having the same ways of being, right? But Jamaican is a nationality. Nigerian is a nationality. Okay, that's why you have many Nigerians will say, I am Igbo, I am Hausa, I am this, I am, people will say, I am Fulani, I am Yoruba, I am these things. We know that these are nations, right? So this association, for example, as we talk about I keep calling her Senator Harris, Vice President Harris, people say, oh, well, her dad is Jamaican, she's Black. Well, you can be from Jamaica and be Chinese. Like, what the hell are you talking about? You could be Asian. Like, come on. Like, what are you talking about? That does not make her Black. How she shows up is where she becomes Black. And I think that's an important distinction to make. Blackness is more or less a monolith. Yes, I said what I said. You all can continue to say Blackness is, not monolithic or anything. It absolutely is. And I'm going to tell you why. I have examples. All of these things exist in every aspect, in every part of the African diaspora. And it all comes from the continent. And we all eat these things. I don't care if you habla Espanol. I don't care if you speak Yoruba. I don't care if you speak Ebonics. I don't care nothing. You and your family got okra, some version of plantain, some version of red rice, and some version of black-eyed peas or peas of that nature. That is who you are, right? And I know it sounds simple and basic, and I have the words joint, John, Joan there showing regional differences in Ebonics and, things like that. It's all the same. We are the same people. We are a monolith. Where we diverge is where white supremacy enters. I'm going to say it again. Where we diverge from each other are the points where white supremacy enters. Okay? Understand what I'm saying? Okay? So, if you're in the chat, I see some people in the chats. I want you to throw out things to me that you think, that I can explain to you how we are different, right? I'll start with one. Let's see. Oh, Christianity, right? People say, oh, Black people were all different religions and things like that. Well, how did Christianity get to us? How did Islam get to us? There's a divergence there, right? That is not who we were before. We were like polytheistic people, okay? Whether it was Ra and Ma'at and, the others there, Isis and Osiris, or whether it was, Oshun and Yemaya and other, we were polytheistic people. Let's cut the shit. So there's a divergence there. Somebody give me something else. I got it. I can go on for days. They were like, oh, we're different. We have different political backgrounds. Some of us are Republican. That's the insertion of white supremacy. No Black person is a Republican without being a white supremacist or having internalized anti-Blackness. It's impossible, right? I don't actually care what you think about that. It's the truth. If you're a Republican, it is because of the imposition of white supremacy. You said family structures. Here we go. Our families are multi-generational families. They are extended families. The idea of this nuclear family that so many of you seem to be thinking is like the aspiration, that is a product of the Industrial Revolution, which was a European thing, okay? One mother, one father, maybe two children. That's because that's all that could fit into them damn apartments near where the father had to go to work. So this idea that the nuclear family is supposed to be like that was purely for spatial issues. This is not a family or Christian thing. It is a spatial issue. So that is an imposition on Black people. And so this idea that they have pathologized Black people and the so-called idea of the single mother is nonsense. There's no such thing as a single mother for African people. Oh, I'm going to say that again because I said that in my dissertation. I'm probably one of the first people to say that, but I'm going to say it again. There is no such thing as a single mother among African people or people of the African diaspora, because even if a father is not present, her community is. And in African culture, the community raises the child. So therefore, she is not single. But this idea of a single mother has been placed onto us, primarily Black women, as a way of trying to suggest that our families are less than, our families are inferior because they are somehow broken, when it was white supremacy that was doing the breaking. Okay. You said Nigerian, you're not a single mother. We all take care of each other. We do that in it don't matter where you are. Whether you are in Nigeria, whether you are in the Bronx, we take care of each other. Okay. Anybody have any other ones that they're thinking about? I'm trying to think of what else, because I can do this. Like, I'm telling you, the points of departure are where white supremacy enter. And that's why I say that we are a monolith. I got another one, because you people love this one, the nerdy, geeky shit. Cut it out. People didn't like me because I like to listen to rock music and goth music, and nobody liked me, and they pointed fingers at me, and they said I was trying. Shut up. That people will be like, oh, well, if you like it, then it's black. No, it's not. You like white things. It's okay to like white things. They like black people things. Okay? Don't nobody love black people's things more than the people that have colonized us. Like straight up. So it's okay. You like listening to, this goth rager kind of stuff, and you want to wear the all black and the spikes and all those kinds of things, and you doing it as a black. That's fine. We didn't come up with that shit. Excuse me. Oh, sorry, I keep cussing. But I'm passionate about this. And I am from the Bronx. We didn't come up with that. But it's okay. It's okay to do that. And actually, if I wanted to, I could connect that aesthetic to Africa, because that's what I do. But you know what I'm saying? It's okay to like white things. And I think there's an insecurity that shows up with a lot of folks of the African diaspora who were raised in spaces separated from each other. And that is something that we ought to talk more about, the trauma of being disconnected from your people. Adoptees, transracial adoptees talk about it a lot because it's such an acute extraction. Well, we need to talk more about the folks whose parents moved them to white neighborhoods, put them in predominantly white schools because they believed that that would be better for them, and how that was an extraction and a disconnect from your community. And so many people grew up without that sense of community and are struggling with it now, right? And instead of acknowledging that particular type of trauma, because it is a product of white supremacy. If your parents think I have to move to a white neighborhood for you to have a better life, that is white supremacy. That is internalized anti-Blackness. And that is also reacting to the destruction of our Black communities that make them unsafe or make the quality of education less, make it inferior, etc. Your parents made that choice because of white supremacy. And that's okay. And you were disconnected from that. But that is not for you to grow up and be bitter at those who did grow up in those communities. If anything, reach out and try to reconnect. Because often, we don't actually give to you. Come on, the cookout is happening. We'll invite you before we invite the person that's playing in your iPod, right? Family structures. Okay, we talked about family structures, but valuing education. Oh, that's a good one. We are the original educators. We are the original scientists, mathematicians, artists, and everything. You got to make sure that we know that. I always got to say that whenever I'm talking about this. And I'm going to actually stop sharing this just so I can talk to my people. I like that. Valuing education. Everybody values education for the most part. I think African people value education a lot more than we give ourselves credit for. We've been denied access to so-called formal education, but we are the architects of education. The process of a person standing in front of a classroom and instructing students is African. The idea of sitting in a circle and having intellectual conversations where you are learning from a leader and a guide, that is African, okay? So of course we love education, but because of colonization, we have been disconnected from, one, the actual act of learning to read, which is why our literacy rates are as horrible as they are to this day. But we've also been denied access to full knowledge and full education. As Carter G. Woodson, another Harvard doctor, a good one, said, we have been miseducated. We have been taught in the ways that go against our African ways of being and knowing. What do you expect? Can you train a dog to be a cat? Can you train a cat to be a dog? You can try as much as you can, but that cat will never be a dog. It may kind of act like it a little bit, but it's never going to be a dog. And that is kind of what has happened to us. They are trying their best to educate us to be like them because they have decided that their ways of being are the best and universal. And those are the only options that we get. So when we go to our schools, if you live in a colonized country, you are going to a school with Eurocentric education, and that is what you are learning. You are going to learn the things that they believe are important for you to learn. And since they want to maintain that supremacy, you are not going to learn about yourself. And that is where Afrocentric scholars come in and why we subvert that. That is why Sankofa Summer School exists, because I want to make sure that we have opportunities for education that go outside of the European ways of being and knowing, right? Hygiene and grooming. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna talk. I don't have a lot of time, so we're in the Q&A section. If you have any questions, please, please, please put your questions in the comments. I generally keep these at 45 minutes, but it's my school. I can do what I want. Put some questions in the chats if you have them about anything that I've said so far or any questions you have related to this. The hygiene and grooming thing is so interesting because no offense to the European people and people of European descent, of the European diaspora. No offense to you, but y'all wash your damn legs. Wash your legs. Wash in between your toes. Use a washcloth. Don't use your hands with that bar of soap. That's nasty. And your ancestors had to be taught proper sewage by African people because your plagues were killing you because of how unhygienic and nasty you were. Okay? So then you turn and decide to call us nasty and us dirty and us savage. You called us, the Africans, you called the indigenous people, you tried to suggest that we were dirty and stinky and smelly. And because you put that on us, along with denying us access to the ability to clean ourselves as a way to humiliate and keep us subjugated and debased, you decided that we were the dirty ones. And in turn, that is why we are hyper-focused on hygiene, why Black mothers scrub their children down and make sure that they are not filthy. You don't bring your outside clothes inside. You don't wear your shoes indoors. That's something that they do. That's how we think about it. The people that have harmed us, the people who have colonized us, they do that nasty shit. We don't do it, right? That's where that comes from. It's wild, right? You said interracial dating as a symptom of internalized anti-Blackness. Listen, that's a whole other class. And, you know, I'm one of those people because this idea of interracial, if you listen to anything that I said, doesn't quite make sense, does it? Right? It's more intercultural. And if you are assigned Black, I'm going to use that language because I think it's important. If you are assigned Black and you are assigned white, but you grew up in the same neighborhood, around the same people, listening to the same music, eating the same foods, going to the same schools, going to the same parties, the same cookouts, the same events, whatever, you grew up in the same culture. So is it really intercultural relationship? I don't know. I think that when you move towards talking about culture, you start understanding a lot of the ridiculousness of the race talk, right? Because that's just kind of how it is. I got a sister, she like a quarter African. She Blacker than all of y'all. She Blacker than all of y'all. Consciousness, intelligence, the way she shows up in the community, how she raises her children, all of that stuff, she Blacker than all of y'all. So what do we say? But if you were to look at her, like my ex, he's like, she's Black? Yes, she is. You wouldn't know. She got straight hair. She's got white skin. But that is a Black woman, right? Again, how you show up, right? Not that lady on TikTok, though. That's a white woman. I want her to stop because that's a white woman. You said it feel like you're not Black enough. Oh man, don't say that. So yeah. So does anybody have any questions? I'm open for questions. I have really, really, really enjoyed being able to do this for you all, and I appreciate you all being so attentive and participatory, and it's been great. I have a couple more classes coming. I think Monday we're doing one on mental health. I am a retired mental health social worker, so we will be talking about Black people and mental health. And then I'm doing one on the diaspora wars through the lens of hip hop. And those are going to be with other people as well. So I'm going to be kind of co-teaching. I appreciate you all for being here. And yeah. Oh, wait, I see another question. How does engaging in the academic system created by whites affect Black people and Black people who gain those degrees? Well, it's corrupted us, right? It has us out here doing the work of white supremacy. And I say that because, okay, so I just mentioned that I am a retired social worker. I have my M.S.W. from CUNY and Hunter, and I went to the University of Pennsylvania undergrad and all those things, right? everything that I learned, everything that you studied, my undergrad degree is in sociology and African American studies. All the sociology shit that you learned, Durkheim, fundamentalism, all that stuff, functionalism, all that shit, right? You learn all of that, right? It's all European, right? Sociology 101, Psych 101, all you are learning are European names. They never bring up W.E.B. Du Bois in the intro to sociology. And he's one of the most brilliant sociologists we've ever had, but they never talk about him, right? So you end up learning these things, and then you go on to do your studies using these theories, right? So as a PhD student, I was like, kind of like, okay, well, what theory? Of course, I'm going to go with Afrocentricity, the theory, but I'm also in these groups where people are like, yeah, I use phenomenology. Well, phenomenology was developed by one of the racist men that I just told you about. So you're using phenomenology to try to study Black people, and you expect that it's going to make sense. It's going to make like this much sense. When if you use Afrocentricity, it make this much sense. How do you study the ways of being of African people using white ways of being, right? And so when you get into psychology and psychiatry and things like that, the reason why I was dismissive of the DSM, right? The DSM is developed by studying white men. I want someone to tell me how a white cisgender heterosexual male's symptoms of depression are used to diagnose me, a queer Black disabled woman who lives with depression. Why are his symptoms and his criteria being used to diagnose and treat me? So that's where your education fails you. And that's where the racism comes in. And so you've got all these Black therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists who are trying to heal Black minds with white medicine. Y'all, that shit doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. And it's actually harmful because as the studies are now showing, one of the worst things that Black women have been dealing with psychologically is racism. Do we expect that white people are actually going to go and say, hey, your symptoms look like racism? No, they're not. They're not. Okay. They're going to try to explain it some other way. And so what ends up happening is we end up perpetuating our own colonization, our own dislocation, right? Because we are still relying on them to tell us who we are. And at the end of the day, you're going to school to learn who we are and why we do what we do. Double consciousness, can you say more on why you think it's a fallacy? It's not my original idea. Asante and others have debunked it. But the idea of double consciousness, he was saying that you have to be conscious as an American and be conscious as, as a Black person. But American is a nationality and Blackness is a way of being. So they're not at odds with each other. And so there is no need to have a double consciousness. It's a singular consciousness. Your consciousness is how your Blackness is able to exist in America, right? That's the only consciousness you have. How do I navigate America, United States of America, as a Black person? Black people are not, you're not American over here and you're not Black over here. That's what he's saying is that's a fallacy. You do not have to have two consciousness. All right. Any other questions? Is there anything you can say related to dress and style? No, that's a great question. So yes. Okay. Fat phobia is a product of white supremacy, right? Because we all know in most of these cultures, the larger you are, the more it symbolized that you had food and food was wealth. And you being a bigger person like me, I go, to some places and they're like, blessings. That woman eats well. She must have money, right? And it's regarded as a positive thing. How's my fat ass going to fit into European clothes? I can't, because they've decided that this is how the body is supposed to look. And so they're going to make the clothes to force you to fit into those bodies, right? So that kind of goes against the African physical structure, right? So African women generally, not all, I'm sorry, some of you are not blessed in that regard, and it's okay. We tend to have wider hips, fuller backsides, narrower waists, different things like that. Some of y'all got more boobies than others, but you know, it's what it is. But that fashion, they don't design for us. It's really interesting because if I'm not wearing a t-shirt or leggings, I'm usually wearing something designed by an African designer, because those are the clothes that fit my body and make me the most comfortable. So I don't shop. You're not gonna see me wearing Chanel, Gucci, Prada, none of that Italian nonsense. First of all, they were making those for little boys' bodies. So I don't have a little boyish body, so I'm not gonna fit into those clothes. So that's definitely an intervention. And so when you see African people only wearing, and let's take it into professionalism, right? So this idea of what's professional and how you should dress for a job interview or go to work, right? Well, if an African man wanted to wear, traditional clothing, which is maybe longer, may look like what they would call a dress here in the United States, that would be considered unprofessional. Or you're supposed to wear European tailored clothes. I'm telling you, one of the worst things has been convincing African men that they look better in these European clothes than they do in their cultural clothing. Like, my favorite thing of going to the continent is being able to see brothers dressing like that, but then they also wear European style clothing too. So there's that. But just this idea that we should contort our bodies to fit European tailoring instead of supporting our own designers who actually make clothes for us, because we're afraid to walk around in culturally traditional clothing because we feel like we're going to be discriminated against or we're going to be treated differently. Right? A lot of internalized anti-Blackness. So a lot of times when you see me, you'll see me in, all beautiful, bright colors and, Ankara and wax print and things like that, because that's what fits me culturally and physically. I'm not going to get into slavery versus colonialism. That's not the part of this, but I'm not really sure what that means. I don't see it as a question. Does anybody else have any other questions for me? Let's see. Oh gosh, let me scroll. Let's see. How do you heal a relationship with Blackness and community after disagreement? Maybe a question for the mental health class. That might be a good question for the mental health class. How do you heal a relationship with Blackness and community after disagreement? That's a good one. Let me think on that one. I like that question. That's a really good question. Any other questions? All right, so this has been like an hour and 17 minutes long, probably the longest class that we have, but I do really appreciate those of you coming out. SankofaSummerSchool.com/donate. You can make a direct donation to support our school. You can definitely, the folks that I have brought on are doing such amazing work, and I would like to compensate them. And so the more you donate, the more I'm able to do that. We are a grassroots organization. We do rely on the generosity of our community. You all are part of our community. So we would love it if you could make a donation. If you really liked this, there's more classes coming up. You can actually go to our website, SankofaSummerSchool.com, click on 2024 session. You'll see what the upcoming courses are and the descriptions are. You can see how you can, if you want to register, you can sign up, see how to access them. They are going to be streamed live on YouTube. I'm streaming this one on my Instagram as well because it's my class. And I'll probably do that for the next 2 classes that I'm teaching as well. But definitely, we really appreciate the support. Anything that you can give to keep us going and keep this education coming out. I really, really appreciate you all. And I will say goodbye. Thank you so much.